You talk about a lot of interesting things.
Didn't I tell you?
Well, let's go back a little bit in time a little bit. How did it all begin? And I want to ask you the question is about the lessons learned. So the book's been out a little bit, and you've been doing the blog a little bit longer. And why did you get into these at all? And then what have you learned in that time? What have you learned about entrepreneurship? What do they need? And how do you get started?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I had some kind of like master plan and that I foresaw all this, including Todd Park. I mean, really, nothing could be further from the truth, honestly. I think like a lot of startups, it wasn't even my full-time job. It was a side project. I had done a bunch of startups, most of which had failed. I guess any of you don't know, like, I'm a big failure. Hi. You can be a big failure too. Just do what I say. And I had some success at a company called InView, and we had this reputation in Silicon Valley for being a company that could do kind of technology miracles. It was like supernaturally productive, and our team, we cranked out features faster than normal, and we made absurd progress. And in Silicon Valley, it's like a very small, very insular club. So like as soon as you become known for being good at anything, like you instantly get sucked into being asked to advise and share your wisdom and the secret sauce of other people. But really, people have like a deep belief that if something good's happening, it's because the person in charge of it has like a magic power. And they can sprinkle dust and make it happen. So I would,
But there's benefit to spreading that rumor. There's benefits to like.
Listen, it benefited me great. I had this reputation for being some kind of like super genius who could make engineers do super, things that people would bring me in. How do I make my engineers to work harder? It's like, I don't think you understand anything I've been saying. Because I always be like, this has nothing to do with me. I mean, I appreciate the thought, but we are operating a different process that is more efficient at doing the kinds of things that actually matter for startups than your other companies. And they'd be like, that's good point, but you make our engineers work harder. You're hearing. And it's very frustrating. A lot of you had this experience where you're trying to speak against the dominant paradigm and people just can't process what you're saying. It doesn't make sense. And because at InView, I had a lot of experience trying to explain the nutty things that we did. Because there was no lean startup, there was no minimum viable product, those concepts did not exist, it was not popular to do that, it was considered really weird to do continuous deployment and A/B split testing. I can't tell you, now A/B split testing is like so popular, but at that time people really thought it was strange. And I was, in my 20s, I'm a relatively young person, so I'm not qualified to be an expert on anything. Certainly was not at that time. We would have like gray-haired veterans, who would come in, VCs would bring them in to do tech due diligence. And I would explain how things work, and they'd be like, listen, kid, this isn't how it's done in the software industry. Let me explain to you. And they're basically, I realized that they were trying to help me. Kid, I'm here to just check a box so this VC can write you a huge check. So all you have to do is tell the VC, get me to tell the VC that you guys are gonna like adopt, RFPs and marketing requirements documents and go back to waterfall and you'll be fine. And I'm like, no, look, I have the evidence that this way is better. And they're like, listen, kid, you're really not hearing me. This is not how it's done. I mean, listen, if you've never been in a situation where you fail tech due diligence for a startup, I mean, as the CTO of that company, it's very uncomfortable. The money was about to be in the bank, and like the last box to be checked is like the technology is not stupid. And then you don't get that box checked, and then you don't get the money. I mean, my co-founders were not thrilled. And neither was I. It was very stressful. So I had a lot of experience trying to explain what we did, why it worked. And so I had been developing all these elaborate analogies. And I was struggling to find concepts that would make it comprehensible. And I had learned in that search about lean manufacturing. And that really helped me. Because I could show people the data that InView was more productive, and that was because of our process, but I couldn't explain why. It seemed like magic. And once I understood the theory of lean, batch size, cycle time, those key concepts, I was able to translate what we were doing and say, oh, I see, there's a theoretical underpinning that makes sense. Anyway, it's kind of a long answer, but then I started getting into fights with people because I would be asked to advise startups. And I would come in, and they would call me out of my vacation. I was in between companies, taking time off. Would you please come in and talk to our team? And I would come in, and they would get mad and yell at me. Because what I was saying didn't make sense. And so I would say, listen, here's what we did at InView. We continuous deployment. We would ship software 50 times a day on average. And they'd be like, no, that would never work. And I was like, well, okay, that's fine. You can have whatever opinion you want, but this is a fact. I'm just telling you, I was there. I personally shipped the software 50 times. I know it worked. Look, the software is, I'm running on the website. I'll download it on your computer, and you can wait for the next update. You'll get it in 20 minutes. No, you're lying. You're crazy. And so I had this idea. It was a really clever idea, which was, since they called me, and then we got in a fight, so I was like, don't call. Just don't call me if you don't think what I'm saying makes sense. And so I thought if I write them these stories down, so I would say the exact same thing every time. I tell people the same stories, the same concepts, get the same reaction. I'll write them down on my blog. When someone asks me to come in, I'll say, first, read this story. If you think it's written by a crazy person, then please don't call. I swear that was the master plan that I had at that time. I found it really interesting. I enjoyed writing about it, but I didn't think that would become anything more than a hobby. And what happened was very quickly, faster than really I can understand, people started to share the blog with each other, and it started to build up an audience, and people wanted to know, well, okay, what about, sure it works in consumer internet, but what about enterprise? What about big companies? What about physical products? What about retail? I mean, just all these questions that I didn't quite know the answers to. So the blog became kind of my personal therapy as I tried to process, get the stories out of my system. Kind of was very therapeutic to tell these stories of things that had happened to me, but also try to develop the theory of what would it mean to build a theory of entrepreneurship. And I started to get really interested in that topic, and apparently other people did too. So then that proceeded to just take over my life, and now I'm a professional expert. Right? It's very weird. It's a very weird thing to happen to a person.
So now that you overcame all the cynicism and the negative comments. So what have you found is the biggest challenge for when entrepreneurs commit to kind of learning lean startup and applying it? What do you think is one of the hardest things they face?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are hard about it, and then most of them are just the same things that are hard about science. So I occasionally get the criticism, you can't turn entrepreneurship into a science, because if entrepreneurship was a science, anybody could do it. Which I think is very odd, because science is a science, and almost nobody can do it. I mean, it's very rare to find someone actually is good at science. Most of us are terrible at it. And the reason it had to be invented after thousands and thousands of years of human civilization is that it's really counterintuitive to write your beliefs down and subject them to falsifiable empirical tests. That's not something that we are naturally good at. We are very good at finding intuitive understandings of what's happening and drawing cause and effect inferences that are mostly accurate. And unfortunately, mostly accurate means quite a bit inaccurate also. And in our regular life, in evolutionary time, the difference between mostly accurate and completely accurate was not that big a deal. But as we try to do things that are more complicated, as we try to build technology and undertake systems of the complexity of modern life, that distinction has actually been kind of important, and that's why we're all alive today, so thank you, science. But entrepreneurship, and actually business thinking in general, has been relatively immune from the scientific revolution. If you read most business books, they're much closer to astrology than to science. And trying to really say to you, as an entrepreneur, one of the hardest things is to ever be wrong. And it's not that entrepreneurs don't make mistakes. Oh no, it's like Muppet Labs in most startups, and I'm sure yours is perfectly fine, but you guys, Muppet Labs, I'm telling you. What happens is we learn stuff and we change our minds, but we don't remember that we ever thought anything different. And I used to think I was above this phenomenon because I'm so smart. And all smart people, unfortunately, believe that they are immune from all the psychological research on things that people do wrong, which is classic smart person idiocy, myself. And due to a quirk of the way that InView moved offices, it happened to be that one of the very first meetings we had to plot strategy for the company took place on a specific whiteboard that got lost. So I actually remember writing on this whiteboard and brainstorming with my co-founders. And we moved offices right after, and somehow the whiteboard didn't make. Anyway, years later, the whiteboard mysteriously appears, and the text is still preserved. There's our strategy from day one of InView. And I looked at this thing, and I was like, someone's trying to prank me. What kind of person would sneak into our office and write these idiotic things on this whiteboard? Because I can remember what I wrote. I remember it clear as day, like it happened yesterday. And I remember writing things that are correct, that worked. I remember writing the correct strategy for InView on this whiteboard, and the documentary evidence is that I was a complete idiot. And I had no idea what I was talking about. But I honestly, I've seen the whiteboard again, I still can't remember what I used to think would work. So that's really difficult, because if you can't fail, you can't learn. And sure, if you have multiple people on your team, the magic memory eraser that kicks in whenever you learn something new doesn't kick in the same for all of us. So it's not only that I can't remember what I thought before, but my co-founders and I can't even agree on what the strategy was, let alone what it's supposed to be right now. We can't remember what it was, so we can't have a pivot because we can't change the strategy because we can't remember what it used to be, right? So like, all that stuff, you're like, God, that sounds really, if any of you, this doesn't sound familiar to you, maybe you're not in a startup right now, you're like, what is wrong with this guy? Believe me, it's very hard to explain.
So clearly there's an emotional component to this. So how do you reconcile the vision, I'm a founder, I have a vision, with the data, with gut feelings? And
Yeah, this is another thing. People say, well, you know, if you make entrepreneurship more scientific, you'll be like getting rid of the role of vision. And it's just gonna be like turning a crank. And you know, like spreadsheet-driven entrepreneurship. And I'm like, have you done any science? Like, have you noticed that some of the people we revere the most in our society, some of the most creative people that have ever lived, you know, the Einsteins and the Feynmans of the world, do you understand anything about them? Those are some of the most visionary people that have ever lived. But you would never get anywhere as a scientific visionary if you were like, I'm just gonna sit in my room and come up with great theories and just tell people how it is. That's not vision, that's just being a crazy person.
that's a coffee shop philosophy.
Yeah, it's absurd. So like people think, okay, the great business visionaries, that's what they do too. As if like Steve Jobs just sits in a room, and he like thinks up great ideas, and then like that's it, that's the end. Once the great idea has been had, nothing else follows. It's crazy. So it's really important to understand that the point of doing science is because vision is actually a very precious commodity. If someone actually has an idea, you saw it watching Todd talk, like someone really sees the promised land of where we want to get to. You don't want to just wander around at random and hope you get there. You want to find the most efficient path from here to there. You want to test out, hey, is the road we're traveling, does it actually take us where we want to go? Because what happens is, oftentimes we have the right vision, but the wrong specific strategy, because we kind of fantasize a little bit about exactly what the product is going to look like. And, you know, I'm from San Francisco, so when I say it sounds a little woo-woo for people, but I honestly think that entrepreneurship is as much a process of self-discovery as it is anything else. If you could find video interviews with actual visionary founders when they were in the middle of it, like, you know that there's like a very cool interview with Steve Jobs when he still worked at Next, talking about his vision. There's a great interview with Zuckerberg on a couch at Stanford, like doing a cake stand and then like talking about his vision for Facebook. You're just like, what? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You know, you would not believe how bad, like, the things that they got right and the things that they got wrong. What happens is, when you put your vision to the test in a specific strategy, you're forced to make trade-offs that you never have to make in fantasy land, right? Like, you can't have a product that's for everybody and is awesome for college students. You have to choose, which is it gonna be? And you can watch in the video Zuckerberg struggle with he actually says in the video, I don't know if we wanna open it up past college students because it won't be as good for the college students anymore. He's like, what's wrong with just making a great college utility? He's like, I didn't make this up. The Zuckerberg, the guy from the movie, didn't know if he wanted to be a college utility or something else, okay?
Yeah.
So what happens is when you're forced to make real trade-offs when reality intrudes on your fantasy, you discover what you really care about, right? What elements of the vision are critical and which ones actually, you know, you could live without. And then when I go back to that whiteboard about InView, the reason it's so painful to me is we have a list written down of like 10 things we must do for InView to be successful. You know, top 10 features, critical must, I think it even says like must-haves or something. And what's painful about that list is half the things on the list really turned out to be must-haves. And the other half are just idiotic, like jettisoned long ago. And the point is we couldn't tell the difference. We didn't know which was which. And that's why it's so embarrassing. It's like, well, you must really be really quite stupid not to know what to me seems so obvious. But that's what you discover when you put your vision to the test. If you have the courage to bring a little science in, your vision is much more likely to come true. I think that's, you know, I think that's pro-vision. I don't know what you guys think, but that's what I think.
I mean, certainly entrepreneurship is hard enough. One thing that I find appealing about, and maybe this comes out of kind of the actionable, auditable metrics, is this is very open. And everything's on the table, and there's a great sense of community. And so when an entrepreneur is struggling going through that process, how valuable are mentors? And what kind of people do you want to find as mentors? Or, you know, who people do you want around you, and who do you not want around you?
Yeah, I would have accomplished nothing if it wasn't for the fact that I had amazing mentors all through my career. And I think that it's very important to have people around you who have been just kind of been there before. who can give you context. But I've also had really bad mentors who actually really inhibited my ability to be successful. And it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. It's easy in retrospect, so it's challenging. And if I had to kind of put it down, like what's the difference? The mentors that really helped me asked me really good questions. And the mentors that turned out to be really counterproductive were always trying to tell me the answer. You know, they knew how it was. And when I was younger, I preferred the answer. Questions are annoying. Answers are very helpful. It's like, at least you have clarity and certainty about what to do. But unfortunately, anyone who's successful enough in life to be a mentor to you has had experiences that shape them that were very context specific. You know, the strategy that really worked for them where they made a lot of money works great, but maybe your context is different. In fact, it's guaranteed to be different because you're separated in time. So how do you know that what worked for them will work for you? How do you know that what worked in the past will work in the present? How do you know what works in their industry works in your industry?
You run the experiment, don't you?
Yeah, you have to experiment. And I ask people to apply that same standard to the things that I tell. You know, there's no such thing as like the universally correct theory. Every idea is context sensitive. So, you know, lean startup works in a specific context. So says me. But don't be like, well, he's famous, so he must know what he's talking about. That's really bad inference. The only way to find out if anything is true is to test it for yourself. And the great thing about the truth is that every bit of the truth is similar to every other part. So you don't have to take every single thing, a whole lean startup, and like apply it all at once and see what happens. Like, you can take any specific recommendation, and lean startup will help you make a prediction about what's supposed to happen if you do it. And then you can test to see if that prediction comes true. You can make your own inferences to see if that actually happens. And if it doesn't, then you could be a famous guru. Tell the rest of us, I couldn't be happier to be wrong. If you learn something that I didn't know, like, you should tell me and let me be the amplifier to tell the rest of the world about it. Because our goal as a movement is not, you know, for me to be famous. I could care less. And, you know, I've had my 15 minutes of fame. It's been great. You know, really enjoying it. Don't get me wrong. But if this ends and people decide this is a bad idea, like I was very happy doing what I was doing before. I'd be happy to go back. What I think our goal should be is to advance the state of the art in entrepreneurship. And so we can figure out what really works, what makes people more likely to succeed. How do we foster and nurture entrepreneur ecosystems for real, not with Vanity Metrics and Success Theater and all this crap.
What has been your favorite vanity metric that you've come across, the cutest vanity metric?
Oh, Vanity Metrics are awesome. They're so great. I mean, if you read TechCrunch for 5 minutes, you will see all the greatest hits, you know. Like, cumulative users graph is my favorites. Like, total number of registered
people swarming
users.
in their seats.
Yeah, look,
Are there some guilty parties in here?
cumulative users by definition cannot go down. It's always up and to the right by definition. I mean, you can't ever unregister someone. It's just a fact. It's like,
Who uses that one? Honestly.
if you've shown cumulative metrics in a board meeting, raise your hand. Come on. Everyone's hand should be up. I know you've done
Love
it.
your honesty.
Yeah,
You're
at
honest.
least one honest person. Every entrepreneur does this at some point. Cumulative revenue is the same. It's like, yeah. But my favorite actually is something that used to drive me bonkers before I even understood the concept of vanity metrics, unfortunately. At InView, we had a competitor that would not report revenue or user numbers in a straightforward way. They instead would report the GDP equivalent of all the user-to-user transaction and actions in their system.
That's creative.
Which makes absolutely no sense. Like, I kind of understand what they're getting at, but like, GDP is a very specific measure that's used in macroeconomics, like for a situation that like kind of bears some similarity to, you know, this, but come on. And of course, the great thing about GDP is it like way pluses up the numbers. Because you get to, like, if I give you $1, you give it back, we give $1 back and forth, we're cranking up GDP left and right, but no money's being made, especially because these are a virtual world business. So like a lot of times we're trading virtual currency back and forth, nothing's happening, we're just using the product as normal. So it's kind of like, imagine taking your revenue times like the total number of hours used in your product and like multiplying that together, making up a number, you'd be like, wow, that's awesome. So they'd be like, we have a GDP equivalent, and then the press would be like, wow, their economy is as big as, Kenya. Or Norway, or they're getting bigger and bigger, and you're like, that makes even less sense. So I would be in a meeting, and my CEO, I'm the CTO in charge of metrics, be like, what's our GDP? we only got 10 million users. That doesn't seem as good as, $3 billion. And I'd be like, listen, GDP doesn't make sense. And I'd be in a board meeting, wherever board meetings are constantly asking this question. I'd deconstruct why that makes no sense. They'd be like, yeah, that's a good point, that's a good point. But what would it be? Because everyone's always trying to compare theirs to somebody else, and we always want to know, are we good enough, right? It's like, it's really irritating.
But in fact, these are very destructive things, and, right? I mean, they can bring a company down if you don't get your head up straight and realize that you're measuring absolutely nonsense things.
I actually wound up meeting this company years later and talking to them about how fucked up, excuse me. Like they were talking to me about these problems, and I was like, I bet you have the following issue. And they'd be like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, let me just guess. You keep shipping new features, and then you're having an internal debate. You're not quite sure if you made the product better or worse. They're like, how'd you know? I was like, because you guys are like the masters of vanity metrics. And vanity metrics are great for making your competitors feel bad about themselves. And amen to that. Great thing to do, right? Like beat your competitors into submission. Okay, fine. But they're really delusional because you ship a feature, and then the numbers jump up, and everyone's like, ooh, success. GDP went up, so my feature's obviously awesome. But what happens when the numbers go down? Oh, well, we launched this feature, the numbers went down, it's that idiot across the hall. Those guys in marketing ruined our new feature. Would have been great. Right? That's just human psychology, doing its cause and effect thing. But over time, everybody gets to live in a little private world where the things that they do make the numbers go up, and anytime the numbers go down, it's either seasonal effects, which only ever make numbers go down. Anyone ever notice that? No numbers like seasonal effects where like made our numbers go up and to the right. It's like, no. Or if it's not seasonal effects, it's somebody, some other department that ruined it, and you build up this culture where now everyone's got their own different set of facts of what's going on. So you just, at no time are you actually learning based on the impact of your product on customers. You're just learning from a very noisy signal, and so you aren't making bad inferences, and that compounds. In the early days, it's not such a big deal. But as you start to have really large customer bases, and you start to have multiple customer segments, and a lot of press and a lot of things that are going on, the noise increases, and the danger is much greater. And it's actually one of the leading causes of feature creep, because you can never take anything out, because every feature was launched, and at the time that it launched, somebody had proof that it's good, and so you can never take it out, and so you just wind up endlessly adding junk.
So short of developing a vaccine against those things, how do you know if your metric is vanity or not? Is there a simple test? Is there a small test? Is it one of those things that when you see it, you know it? How people out there that come up with metrics, is there a way?
Yeah, it's very straightforward. If you look at a number or a graph, and you immediately know what you need to do to get more of that thing to happen, then you have a good metric, real metric. Otherwise, you have a vanity metric. And some of you are like, well, wait, all 10,000 graphs in Google Analytics, I don't think any of them meet that criteria. And funny that. Yeah, right? Ever noticed that? So, I mean, a lot of the information we consume as entrepreneurs is really not helpful. In fact, you'd be better off not looking at it. Because you're like, when I first was blogging, every hour I'm like logging in to be like, do I have any new readers, any new readers, any new readers? And like, how does that help? What do you do with that information? Just make me feel bad. Like there should be more readers or less, or like you know, whatever random. It's just like it had nothing to do with anything. Or like one of my posts would go to that top of Hacker News and with these huge surge of readers, and I'm like, oh, I did a good job today. Like, or did I? Is going to the top of Hacker News, is that one of my life goals? When did that become important to me? And if you watch this, these news sites that slowly degenerate into pictures of kittens, you're like, why does that happen? Why does it happen to multiple sites? Like, what's going on? Like, it's very straightforward. They're like, we did this amazing in-depth bit of reporting expose on corruption in a third world country, and we got, this number of hits. And then, like, an intern accidentally posted a cat picture, and we got 10,000 times more hits. And, like, hits is what we care about, so, pretty soon, you're not trying to become a cat picture site. It just starts to happen to you. So it's dangerous stuff, because stuff that juices your numbers in the short term is not correlated to the things that actually make you valuable in the long term.
Yeah, some people in here work at a startup full time. Raise your hand, please. Okay. So if someone is in a startup, just read the book, said, I want to go to work tomorrow and start doing lean startup. Where do you begin? How do you start?
Very carefully. First of all, don't try this at home by yourself. Don't just walk into the office and be like, everybody, lean startup, starting now. I used to do stuff like that. It does not work. Now, as an author, I wish I could tell you, you buy a lot of copies of my book, you give them out, and that will solve your problem. But actually, that does not work either. I used to do that. I had everyone read this book, go home tonight, read the book tomorrow, come in, we're doing what the book says, starting tomorrow. And here's the thing, not once did anyone ever say to me, no, I refuse, boss, to read the book that you're randomly recommending to me. No one ever says that. They're always like, yes, sir. And here's the thing, the next day, every person would swear up and down that we're doing it. The problem with adopting Lean Startup is not people that argue with you, it's the people that say, well, we're absolutely doing Lean Startup. And I remember because Steve Blank was a mentor of mine, and we used to do customer development, and we had a thing, I made everyone read this book, and I remember having a conversation with someone, and I'm like, I thought we were doing customer development today. He's like, we are. I was like, so why are you writing this specification document and not talking to any customers? He's like, that's what Steve said to do. Did we read the same book? Didn't Steve say to get out of the building and talk to customers? And he's like, I don't remember that part. And it's like, oh, right. The book just reaffirmed what you already believed. No kidding. So, like, right, and people don't admit that. They think that they've learned something from the book. So it goes back to the thing I was saying before. You just retroactively, you need to step in a political thing, but you retroactively change what you used to believe so that you never believed that.
So of all the people that raised their hands that work full-time in a startup, how many spoke with a customer today? A week ago? Never? So that essentially should be more hands up, right?
Yeah. That's
So
what
you're
I
gonna
said.
do
You don't want to
more
raise your
work?
hand.
You're gonna talk to a customer?
So you know, always the way to start is to see what you're doing as an experiment. That's always step number one. It's just, even if you don't change any of your practices at all, recognize that even if you build a waterfall plan, you just go specification, requirements, design, implementation, verification, launch. That is an experiment. It says, if we follow this set of steps, and we do this thing at this time, then these results will follow. And so, when you see it as an experiment, you can first, the word requirement starts to make no sense at all. Like, nothing is required, it's a choice. We're choosing to structure the experiment this way, because then you can start having an interesting conversation with your co-founders, like, wait, is this feature actually necessary to run the experiment? And you're like, well, it's necessary because everyone knows you can't launch a Web 2.0 app without rounded corners. It has to have rounded corners. It's like, is that like on the 10 Commandments somewhere? You must. Could we launch the rounded corners in the second version? Right? You just start to have the conversation about not, I like rounded corners, you don't, or whatever the random fight you get into, but like, is this necessary to learn the thing we're trying to learn? And if you're doing waterfall, you can't even ask that question because nobody in a waterfall process ever writes down what you're trying to learn. You only write down what you're trying to build. So just begging the question of what are we trying to learn in order just to see if we structure the experiment well is already a huge advance over the older style of entrepreneurship. So if you do nothing else but just have that conversation with your co-founders, you can make huge progress. But of course, I wouldn't have written a whole book if I didn't think there's like hundreds of things I think you should do beyond just that one thing. But
See, you got into my little hobby, which is experiment design. I think I'd like to stop and take questions from the field now.